So this is the review that where I'm going to cover everything. It's actually the second time I'm doing it because I got deleted the first time. As you can see, everything's been written out already because I did a video before. Yeah, anyways, so doing it again. So what do we talk about? Okay, so firstly we talked about the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe has three aspects we spoke about: the lateral, inferior, and the medial aspect. With the gyri of each part. So for the lateral, you have the precentral gyrus. So it's how do we divide the frontal and the parietal? By the central sulcus. In front of it is the precentral gyrus. It's for where the primary motor cortex is found. So when you want to move, this is the cause of it. Have a superior, middle, and inferior frontal gyri. And in the inferior is the important part because you have the triangular and the operculum. The triangular and operculum part is called the Broca area. So Broca area. What's the Broca area for? Production of speech. So what happens is that you know what you want to say, but when you say it, it doesn't come out the way you want it to. And another area is called the Wernicke area. This is not part of the frontal lobe. Instead, it's in the superior temporal gyrus, and this is for understanding speech. So what happens is if someone wants to talk, the words that come out won't be coherent and they'll be random words. So if they want to say, I want to go to the shop, they will be mixing up. So it'll be like shop, want to I, or something like that. So it just won't be in the correct way, and they wouldn't even know that they're saying it wrong because their understanding of speech isn't there. So that's the Broca and the Wernicke area. Anyways, going back, so we spoke about the lateral aspect. Now we should look at the inferior aspect. So the inferior aspect, we have what? The rectus or the straight gyrus, and then why is it away? Okay, so the straight gyrus or the rectus gyrus, and here is the olfactory tract. So what's the point of me mentioning this? Because the straight gyrus is medial to the olfactory tract, and what is lateral to it? Here, the orbital gyri. Orbital gyri is called orbital gyri because it sits on top of the eyes. And what happens is we done the inferior, so you see the straight gyrus and the orbital gyrus. And then we look at the medial side. So the medial side, we have what? Again, how do we know where the medial side is? Well, the central sulcus is here. So this sort of divides the parietal and the frontal. Around the central sulcus, you had the paracentral lobule, and only the anterior portion is part of the frontal lobe. Another gyrus that's part of the frontal lobe is the medial frontal gyrus. We also spoke about the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is not a gyrus. Instead, it's a connection between the two hemispheres of the brain. We call it a commissure, so because it's connection. So the corpus callosum is a commissure. You have the anterior commissure here, yeah. You have a posterior commissure over here as well. They're just connecting the two sides of the brain horizontally, connecting them. Okay, and then you have the cingulate gyrus that surrounds or is above the corpus callosum, and we've written it here. The medial side, what do we have? The anterior aspect or the anterior portion of the paracentral gyrus, medial frontal gyrus, and cingulate gyrus put in brackets because it's not actually part of the frontal lobe, it's part of the limbic system. Next part we're going to talk about is the parietal lobe. Already mentioned that central gyrus is the one that divides it. So what is it made up of? Postcentral gyrus over here. It's part of the primary somatosensory, so for touch, etc. We're going to go over here. And then, what other things do you have? The superior and the inferior parietal lobule. Inferior parietal lobule is the one to take note of because it has the supramarginal gyrus and the angular gyrus. Yes? And then they're separated by the intraparietal sulcus. yeah, intra because it's inside the parietal lobe and it's dividing the parietal lobe. Yeah. So superior parietal lobule and inferior parietal lobule is in the lateral aspect, and we have these two guys right here. The parietal lobe is made of, okay, so let me show you a picture of it. So the parietal lobe on the medial aspect, as we already said, the paracentral sulcus is divided. So you have the posterior aspect of the paracentral lobule, and you have this part called the precuneus. Precuneus because it's in front of this line, which we'll speak about, or it's called the parietal occipital sulcus. But when we talk about the occipital, that's what divides the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. Okay, so we should now talk about the temporal lobe. So temporal lobe, you have the superior, middle, and inferior temporal gyri, and then here is the lateral sulcus that divides the temporal lobe. And how do we divide the temporal lobe from the occipital lobe? Know that we're speaking about this parietal occipital sulcus here. If you continue the parietal occipital sulcus on the lateral aspect towards the pre-occipital notch here, you can create an imaginary line which is this, and it separates these lobes, the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe. Yeah. Okay, so the temporal lobe, we mentioned superior, middle and inferior. In the lateral sulcus, if you look on the inside of it, you'll find something called the transverse temporal gyrus. And what's important about that, it's for hearing. So I've written it here. Sorry. Lateral, you have the superior, middle and inferior temporal gyrus. Transverse temporal gyrus, and it's called also the Heschel gyrus, and it's important for hearing because it's where the auditory cortex is found. So when you have hearing, the cochlear nerve is stimulated and it travels through, but the end part where it goes to is the auditory cortex, and it's found where? The transverse temporal gyrus. They usually like to use this Heschel gyrus, Heschel, so like that. Okay, so we looked at the lateral aspect. Now look at the inferior gyrus. Inferior aspect. So the inferior aspect we spoke about. So here is going to be the inferior temporal gyrus where we left off. Then you have the occipital temporal gyrus, parahippocampal, and the uncus. But as I mentioned before, the occipital temporal gyrus is there, but the parahippocampal gyrus and the uncus are not part of the temporal lobe. Instead, they actually the limbic system. Why am I mentioning these anyways, even though they're not part of temporal? Because in your exam, they'll ask you to name these gyri. On the inferior aspect, the lateral aspect, the medial aspect, they will be telling you to mention these. Yeah. And you can mention to them it's part of the limbic system, and limbic system is part for memory. We'll speak about that later. Okay, so we're doing occipital. So now we're doing occipital lobe. We spoke about occipital lobe, how it's divided by the parietal occipital here and here. Then we can divide the occipital lobe into two by this calcarine fissure here. Calcarine sulcus, sorry. Calcarine sulcus divides, above the calcarine sulcus you have the cuneus, and below it you have the lingual gyrus. So what am I mentioning here? I've written it down already. Calcarine sulcus, above is the cuneus, below is the lingual gyrus. And the importance of the calcarine sulcus is where the visual cortex is found. So the V1 area, so when you have visual pathway, ultimately it will reach this part, the calcarine sulcus, where V1 or the visual cortex is found. And